Today we have a scholar with us who's talking about a subject that's very important in India, how to define and implement effective targeted subsidies. We have with us Professor Nishith Prakash, who teaches in the United States at Northeastern University. He's been studying an experiment and a trial in Bihar that is giving bicycles to young women to increase their mobility and their opportunities. It's a targeted subsidy because it's only going to women of certain age, and it's effective according to what he says. So let's listen to him. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you so much, Subodhji, for inviting me to this panel and introducing me to students, because I think that's I would say the most significant part is to not just interact, but learn from each other. So as we agreed, we'll be talking about I would say, very long-term agenda on a question that I have been working for a very long time. So this is going to be more of a storytelling about a research agenda. I would now call it research agenda. Back then, I would just pick up a policy question, how I got excited about it, and what went into writing the first paper, then the follow-ups after that. So this is about a kind of a fairly, I would say, back then very innovative policy that was launched in 2005, 2006 in Bihar, which is a state in eastern part of India, when the new government came to power, led by the chief minister, the current chief minister, Nitish Kumar, was providing free bikes to girls who would go to grade 9. So when the policy was launched, I think this was all over in the news, all over in the newspaper. And I do keep track of the news, and I actually recommend students to it's kind of one way to see what's happening. I wouldn't, these days when you meet a lot of students, when you ask them, how did you get excited about a research question, they start the conversation, I found this data. I would discourage students from doing that, kind of take a step back and think about what excited you about the question. To me, when I learned about the policy, what excited me was this just didn't make any sense to me. That was my first reaction. Like, you're giving cash to adolescent girls to buy bikes in a state where, I would say, the state capacity is very limited in terms of what it can do. So, and anyone who is from, not just from Bihar, and I know Nikhil is from Bihar, but other places like Bihar, I'm not kind of tagging Bihar, but there are many places where this could be easily done. So for example, you're expecting people to buy bikes, giving them cash. It's very easy to fake receipt, right? Come up with some kind of a fake receipt. So my first response was, this just doesn't make any sense. And I was very tempted to look at the question from actually a very policy standpoint. So that's how I first started. I didn't start thinking this is such a fascinating intellectual question. Okay, this is a very policy relevant question, makes a lot of sense. But the way it was being done, I had my own doubts. So I went in with this prior that this is an interesting policy, but likely it's not going to work. So this is in 2008. I had just graduated, and I was thinking about what questions do I want to work on. And I started thinking about this question, then started thinking, okay, there's a question, there's a policy. Now, how do you study the policy? So of course, now you go back to you need data. And then even if you have data, what would be the identification strategy, especially when the policy has been launched in the entire state, right? So there's a roadblock. Which means I paused. Then I thought maybe there are ways to collect data. Collecting data means money, and especially when you are graduating from a kind of a mid-rank to kind of a low-rank PhD program, unlike a top-rank program where it's easy to raise resources. It's not easy to raise resources. And I was a visiting faculty at Ohio University. It's a small place in Ohio called Athens. And as a visiting faculty, you don't have access to resources. So I think I kind of paused there. It was, I collected a lot of administrative data. So a lot of the policy documents, like what was going on, how many cycles were being distributed, just to kind of understand the context. And anytime you do a research, like something that I highly recommend my student is to really take some time to understand the context, because it's very important. You're presenting somewhere, somebody might just come and say some questions about context. And at times it's embarrassing when you don't know the context. So I spent a lot of time thinking about the institutional details, about policy documents, and then kind of it was a dead end. Like, this is not going to work because I don't have access to money. And I think I was pretty certain that I needed money to collect some data. So this was kind of a pause for, I would say, year and a half. And my second job after Ohio University, I was there for a year, went to Dartmouth College again as a visiting faculty. And I met Professor Asim Khwaja, who's at Kennedy School. And I was kind of telling him about this policy and how exciting it is, but also at the same time, empirically, my prayer was I would not find an effect. And, we all have people who we admire, and he's somebody who I really admire. He introduced me to the whole International Growth Center team, which had an office in Bihar. So I got invited. It was kind of a paid trip, which is amazing. I was back after I was doing my postdoc at Cornell, and I got invited to this paid trip to my hometown, and everybody, all the politicians, I think even the deputy chief minister was there, and all excited about this program that, this is doing wonders. And he specifically kind of asked, आप लोग जो अर्थशास्त्री लोग हैं, आप इसको क्यों नहीं अध्ययन करते हैं और बताते हैं कि हम लोग कैसा करें? And I also met my potential co-author back then, right? Karthik Muralidharan, professor at UCSD, also in that conference. So we started chatting, and we had a quick word with Professor Maitresh Ghatak, who was kind of the lead academic of IGC Bihar. And we said, look, I told him that I have a plan and it would require some money. And he said, oh, why don't you submit a proposal? So we submitted a proposal, and we kind of knew that we get the money because this is such an important policy that needed some kind of empirical evidence. So we got the money, and we decided what data to collect. So we wanted to first collect enrollment data, enrollment at the school level, right? Because this is a school level intervention for boys and girls over time for both Bihar and the neighboring states. So we had what we call in the paper difference in difference, right? So we wanted to estimate the effect of girls, and we wanted to kind of compare them to group who did not get exposed. So we kind of had a plan in terms of empirical strategy. So we started data collection in both Bihar and Jharkhand. It wasn't that hard, actually. I mean, the hardest task was just to kind of figure out the logistic. So, at Patna, you had the principal secretary. We had a kind of a big thumbs up for him and the education minister. And we had to send kind of this document to every school. They would enter the data, send it to the district education officer, and they would send it back to Patna. So we had we had one meeting, and I think that part was fairly smooth. I wouldn't say it was challenging at all. So we got the data, and IGC, every donor likes to show that they are making progress on the project they have funded. So probably it was the second meeting or so in Patna, and we had a presentation also, which I don't think we were super comfortable with the presentation. It was very early result. And in the audience, we had Professor Andy Foster, who is at Brown. He was there. And after the presentation, he said, I would like to talk. And we had a very, very candid conversation. I must say that I was very nervous about that conversation. I'm like, okay, I don't know how this is going to go. So, and he asked me a very kind of a pertinent question. Why are you doing this? I said, this is a very important policy question, like very standard answer. And he said, but yeah, why should it interest to an economist, right? This is really, I think it's very important because many times when you interact with the senior, they really push you to think hard. And I said that probably you're right. This is just kind of, if I'm doing an impact evaluation, this is of interest to policymakers, maybe, right? Because the policy has already been done. So there's no like going back. So then we started talking about economics. So, and then I mentioned that, yeah, I do get the point that, trying to understand what's the kind of distance cost to going to school. And that kind of got him excited. It's like, yeah, so you should really think about estimating the distance penalty. And I said, yeah, but how do you get that? Because you need a very big sample, household level sample to estimate how far you are from the school. And there's no data back then that had this information. So this is like kind of, we go back, to square one. We had some results, which was difference in difference result. We knew it was a bit problematic because we were looking at the post policy data, and there was some bit, I would say, abrupt jump in enrollment numbers. So we were a bit concerned, and we thought that maybe this is something that we would write for, I would say, Economic and Political Weekly. And no offense to Economic and Political Weekly, but I thought that would be a kind of a great outcome for us. So that's kind of like the first stage of the project, where you kind of get excited about a question, then you hit roadblock, and then kind of go back to square one. And that's when I realized that there is actually a data set that was collected, DLHS, which actually had exactly what we were looking for. They had all the educational history of every member, but they also had questions about how far do you live from school, right? So kind of a big, I would say, big moment for both me and Karthik. We exchanged emails pretty late at night that looks like we are back in action. And very quickly, we knew that if we had the right data, we had a plan in terms of what the empirical strategy is going to look like. So without getting into details, so we use the administrative data to come up with a very credible result, where we find that this policy was actually effective. This is like totally opposite of from my prior. My prior was this would not be effective. The policy had a pretty large impact on girls' enrollment, which is around 32 or 34%. And the gender gap in enrollment went down by 40%. And this is just the average. So if you look at the effects by different points in the distance, these effects were actually very large for kind of, say, if you're a little far away from the school. Now, once you have the main effect, you want to think, why do you find these effects? What are these underlying mechanisms? So here also, I think we got really lucky because we had this data which was of a reasonable size, sample size to do some fancy estimation. So what we find is this is effective, but almost the effect is negligible if you live very close to the school, right? Which also makes sense. If the school is in the same village, why should the cycle make any difference? So we show kind of a very nice inverted U-shaped, where if you live close to the school, it's almost like zero. If you live too far away, it's zero, but it's an imprecise zero. And somewhere in the middle, you find a pretty large effect. Now, that happened, and that graph was absolutely gorgeous in an academic term, because it was exactly what a theory would have predicted. And then, while we were going back and forth, those days, both, I guess he's like one of the most workaholic person that I have met, but, we would take turns to, he would sleep around his 3 a.m. and I would sleep around my 3 a.m. He was in California. So we had lots of fun back then. So we, it hit another roadblock. We had an inverted U shape, but then there were two confounds which would have predicted almost exact inverted U shape. One is safety, girls' safety, and especially, governance and law and order was improving at the same time in Bihar. In Bihar, road construction was happening at the same time. So how do you isolate that? And I think that was a really kind of a moment where I'm like, damn, this is another dead end. right? Because we know what it takes to publish a paper. And this is all like I think both were pre-tenure days. A lot of pressure back then. So I think, I slept and I was pretty sad. And then I remember I woke up in the morning and then wait a second, we have data on grade 8, we have data on grade 7. They are exposed to the same distance problem, although a bit less because secondary schools, less number of secondary schools are in your own village, but it's not as if all middle school are in the village. So you still have some variation there. So we had grade 7 and 8. They are exposed to the same road, quality road, in order, but not the bikes. So intuitively, the idea was to estimate the effects on grade 7 or 8. You should find no effects, right? And then you're golden. So I remember, this is one of those moments you never forget. I texted him early in the morning. I was like, "Can you run this?" I said, well, I'm just feeling good about it. Let me just enjoy the moment rather than just find the results and be depressed again. But he sent messages so many times. So, I go to work and I kind of ran this and that was amazing because that was exactly what we had anticipated. We didn't find any effects on grade 7 and 8. So that kind of led to this big okay, we have an effect, we know what's going on. So we ended up writing this paper. And again, when you graduate from, that's valid for me, from places where, we all should aspire to do well, right? But for me, what's really important that I should also know what my limitations are. So I definitely, we wanted to try this paper, publish at a good place. So we submitted to a journal, which is not just prestigious, but very fast in rejecting. So it's, your papers are rejected within few hours. So it's called the Quarterly Journal of Economics. We submitted there and it didn't get test rejected. And we got reports after 2 months. It was pretty close. We got 4 reports. And we also got 2 editors' report. And again, I have no clue what these things mean, but Karthik told me that, we came very close. And pretty reasonable reports where they talked about can you say a bit more what in terms of what it did? But we were only relying on admin data. We did not have any other data. So we took another chance. We worked on the revisions. We submitted to another top journal in economics, the American Economic Review. We didn't get that positive report. It was rejected with 4 reports. Then we submitted to, and I'm sharing these things because just this happens, and this happens a lot. So it's okay if papers get rejected. Then we submitted to Review of Economics and Statistics, and I would have been delighted by that outcome. My dream still is getting a paper published in Journal of Development Economics, because I'm what, that's my field journal. If I publish this, I'm very proud of myself. So we got a reject and resubmit. And I don't think those comments were doable. So it was back to square one, and we had a very nice, me and Karthik, we talked, and given his experience, he suggested that why don't we answer everything that American Economic Review has asked and request the editor to submit this to another another journal within that system called American Economic Journal Applied Economics. And I said, sure. So we worked on all those comments, and I think the entire response is around 40 pages. So, taking every comment, making sure everything is answered. Very important to kind of answer questions raised by the referees diligently. So we submitted the paper to AG Applied, and kind of surprisingly, within a few months, we got, I think it was a conditional acceptance. And Esther Duflo, she was handling our paper, and it's kind of very nice that, she said this can be a staple paper for undergraduate programs. And she had few comments. We addressed those comments, and the paper was done. Now, usually when the paper is done, it's okay, this is awesome. But inside there were several unanswered questions. The first unanswered question was I know throughout, whenever I visited schools in Bihar, these girls like when you talk to them, you feel that they were so confident. They're like, oh, I have this bike, and just pride. It's very hard to capture in data. So we knew that there's something else going on, this whole empowerment story. But I cannot answer that. So it's like, I want to do more work, but I cannot. And somehow the paper attracted a lot of media attention. And I was giving a talk at World Bank, I think maybe 2013 or 2014. I can't recall which year. And a gentleman was present in the audience. And after the conversation, after the talk, we spoke, and he introduced that he was the president of World Bicycle Relief. And he said, this is what we do. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. So, and he's like, would you like to come to Chicago and give a talk, and to a more friendly audience? Because the World Bank audience are pretty tough. So I went to Chicago, and I learned about the program. This is what they were doing in many countries, and they wanted some engagement with academic. And this is like, at this cusp of pre-tenure, where you want to take up a new work, which will kind of take up a lot of your time, and where you know that the marginal contributions are going to be a bit lower. But again, like, this was something that I was super excited about. It's like, yeah, absolutely. But I did tell them that what you're doing is amazing. I know you don't need a lot of help. So we started talking about this potential experiment, like doing this experimentally. And at the same time, we also got UBS Foundation director reached out to both of us, me and Karthik, saying that, you have done this work. I don't understand everything, but we would like to talk, to explore an opportunity to work together. So everything was going on, and this led to the second work, which was an experiment in Zambia. So the experiment in Zambia is pretty much like, things that were unanswered in part one, right? Which is about, we know that this impacts girls' empowerment. When I say empowerment, broadly speaking, their aspiration, their bargaining, their locus of control, many things comes under empowerment. And social scientists have created this kind of a nice module to measure empowerment. So, so I started that work in Zambia, and I think the planning started in 2015. And we managed to have all the data collection done just before COVID, which was brilliant. And we also ended up collecting additional administrative data after COVID. So what we found was quite interesting. We didn't quite replicate what was happening in Bihar, but we wanted to kind of push this kind of knowledge a bit more. So we played around with what they were doing, which is World Bicycle Relief. So they provide bikes to girls, and they charge small amount, like around $5 to $6, and that amount covers all the, repair cost. There is a mechanic who's trained in the village, and that's what they're supposed to do, fix things. So we convinced them that, can we have another treatment, which is more about, let's do without money, right? I mean, I'm happy to talk more, but essentially we thought about several things and eventually settled to this. So we have the second treatment is identical to the first one. Everything is the same, except that people don't pay this amount. And there's a whole motivation behind it. Like, when you don't pay anything, there's a whole idea about, like, parents are going to be more selfless, would love their girl child to ride the bike. But when you pay money as a parent, you feel more entitled, that this is yours. So ownership becomes kind of salient there. So there was I would say, social psych literature supporting one versus other, which I felt was exciting to kind of test it out. So we do this in Zambia, and what we find is these bikes, again, my prior went totally wrong. So my prior was the treatment arm where they don't pay any money. That would show very strong effects. And the one where they pay money, the effects will be slightly lower. Because, like, I guess, like, I was being guided by the literature that when you don't pay money, altruism and everything is much higher. So what we find is when you pay money, that's when the effects are very strong. But more or less, you cannot distinguish the payment versus no payment differently. I think they work almost the same. And we find effects on time. So it takes much lower, on a baseline of 10 minutes one way, you save around 32 to 35 minutes one way going to school. And we find effects on attendance. It actually goes up by quite a bit, anywhere between 6% to like around 45%, depending on the time frame we are looking at. It improves punctuality. So these girls used to be late to school. So they were missing, basically the instruction time was going down on two dimensions. One, you're missing your school. B, you're coming late to school. So the time, instruction time was being impacted. So we find the punctuality went up by 66%. So kind of fairly large increase. And we also looked at safety, because many of these girls are sexually harassed on their way to school. So now they're kind of going in groups. So, that kind of went down. And we had kind of pretty hard measures where we asked these girls, how many days did you miss school because of safety concern, right? Not just kind of perception. We also have questions on perception. So that improved as well, but so did this actual measure. So we kind of wrote that paper in, I think, 2021 or 2022. And this is again when you write a paper. I felt that it was a pretty well done experiment, finding kind of interesting results. So we submitted this to, we went to American Economic Review first, and we got 3 reports. It was rejected. Then we went to Quarterly Journal of Economics. It was just rejected. Then we went to Econometrica. It was just rejected. Then we went to Journal of Political Economy. It was just rejected. But one reason why we were trying econ was some of our co-authors, junior co-authors, they wanted to publish in econ journal because they wanted to go to the econ, kind of the academic job market. But this is something we, in my team, we had discussed many times, that why we think that this should be kind of targeted in non-econ journal. When the junior co-authors, one of them joined Kritika, she joined analysis group, and Anna joined JPAL. So our hands were not tied. So we submitted this to Science, fully knowing that it's going to be hard. Interestingly, I had never submitted paper Science, but I have refereed for Science. So I had some idea in terms of how it works, but not fully. So we did not rewrite this paper for Science. We just kind of submitted the way we wrote for econ. And we got 3 set of comments from the editor where they said they liked the paper, but they would like to see changes before they submit it to reviewers. We didn't know what it meant in terms of like, what does it even mean? Because in econ, it's very different. So we addressed those comments and we submitted the paper. It went out to reviewers and it came back with a revise and resubmit. So we were just delighted, because like, if we are working on the revision, by the way, now, and it's doable. We should be able to submit in next 1 month or so. So it doesn't end here, because
but Nishith, before you go ahead, I want to add a comment on Zambia. Okay.
Yeah.
Because most of these people have not been to Zambia. Rural Africa is very different from rural India. The distances are huge and the population density is very low. It's nothing like India at all. In rural Zambia, it's 11 people per square kilometer. Okay? Basically 3 families in 1 square kilometer. There's no density. In fact, it's hard to set up schools nearby because there aren't enough people. It's hard to do rural electrification because there aren't enough people. They say miles and miles of bloody Africa. You go for miles and miles and there's no one there. So how are you going to set up? So the distances have to be large to go to school, especially if you're talking about 9th grade, where there aren't that many, there's a huge number at the elementary school, and then there's a filter. So when you're talking about the higher grades, the number of students is going to decline. And so that's just one comment. And second, it's just very hard to get results in Zambia, okay? It's just getting results in most of Africa is much, much harder than getting results in Asia, okay? East Asia is very good, easy. India is easier, but Africa, it's very tough to get results. Just my own life, I'll tell you that you can get them, but they come slower and they come at a higher cost. Everything costs twice of what it costs in India, and everything is twice as
Yes, that's absolutely true on the cost
and
part.
everything is twice as hard as it is in India. So don't think of it in India in terms of success. In Zambia is a very, very difficult thing to get. So I just wanted to add that as a comment on Zambia. I haven't been to Zambia in many years now, but the reality is that it is not, none of those places are easy. Maybe Rwanda is now an exception, but it's very tough to get results. And
But
the result is, of course, very sound because you can't get published in Science without having some strength to your data. So sorry for that, but I couldn't help myself because
no,
these
I'm
people
glad.
have not been to Africa and I've been through miles and miles of Africa. So I thought I would add that comment just as
But I would add like few consistencies. So, for example, when I went to Zambia, there was one girl. She was carrying the keys of her bike in her hand, and she said, "Anyone needs to ride this bike needs my permission." Right? That's like almost identical. So when you think about female empowerment, no matter which country you're talking about, there are lots of consistency, similarities. So there are like actually less dissimilarities and more similarities. So one of the girls, she showed me where she, like in her hut, they would, there's this place where she digs and kind of puts the keys, hides the keys, so that nobody can take that. Even one of the parents was the village leader. He's like, oh no, I have to ask her permission to ride the bike. So these are different anecdotes, but it tells you more about kind of the real empowerment story. So when I know this we haven't been we should be able to kind of get this published soon, but this is again this is an agenda where there are still unanswered questions. So one of the biggest questions that like I am very interested in, like what happens in long run. So do these girls have any real, like for example, what we measure is all self-reported, that yeah, aspiration, bargaining. So we have a question about desired fertility. So they want to have less number of kids. They want to marry late. These are self-reported. Now, what happens when these decisions come? So we managed to track some of these girls, and it hasn't been easy. And the paper is not there yet, so don't ask me, but we actually find opposite results. We find effects on education and environment to be roughly the same, which is amazing. But we find that these girls actually get married and are pregnant. So which is totally opposite of what you would have anticipated. Now, it forced us to think about like what is going on. So for example, maybe, these are all hype, like, things that we are speculating. I have no idea. We're still like kind of we have results which are robust. Now it's about interpreting these results. So we are trying to go back to people who conducted the survey to kind of get some feedback on what really happened, right? And I think what really it's hard to kind of give you a concrete answer, but it's possible that we have to think about marriage market. Like maybe if everybody around you is getting married, and maybe you might not have this best choice, so maybe you still might want to get married early. Second is think about maybe you are more valuable in the marriage market because you have education. So there are kind of few other things at play, but then it goes against the empowerment story, right? Because in the whole empowerment story, the narrative is like, oh, you should be like, people should have, have more autonomy. So I don't know what's happening, but I can tell you that what we found, we are trying to figure out what really happened, what explains this. So this would be kind of the third paper. We are still very excited about that, but I can tell you, I'm still kind of going to do one fairly large experiment. And something that I was always interested in is this kind of, what's the ideal experiment? So the ideal experiment is you give somebody cash for education, girls' education. So you kind of make it conditional, but still have lots of flexibility in how it's spent. Second is give them bikes, right? Exactly what we did in Zambia. Third, what I wanted to test is kind of think about the demand curve. What will the demand curve look like? For example, if you introduce discount coupon. And this is more to understand that if you have to like implement a policy that is self-sustainable. You like maybe many states are not okay giving 100% subsidy. Maybe some state is okay giving 50% subsidy. So it's important to know what's the demand curve looks like. So that's the third one. And the fourth one is kind of the pure control. So this I have been thinking for a long time, and we really struggled to find a partner. So eventually, we'll be doing this in India as we speak. We are writing a proposal, and my university, Northeastern, has been very supportive of this. So they want to see the proposal, and the aim is they will try to fund it as much as possible. And also, doing work in India is a lot cheaper. So, but this would kind of be an ideal experiment in terms of where we are going to kind of pitch one versus another and see what we find, but also track these girls in long run. So kind of a 2nd year, 3-year, and 5 to 7 year long run outcome, so that we know what happens when they enter the labor market. So I'll actually stop here.
Okay, thank you, Prof. That was very good. I just want to add one point that I have been following this from the day that it was announced, but I'll keep my thoughts to myself because I'd rather let the young people speak. So Nikhil, you are first, so please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Professor Nishith, for this presentation. It was really nice to like hear sort of a broad history of like the project and like what steps, like what hoops you had to sort of cross, and like what the different roadblocks were and how you sort of came through, and the broader framing around the idea. One of the questions I had was like, in terms of studying long-term impacts, one of the things I always struggle with is like lack of good administrative data which sort of links different outcomes. In a lot of ways, like it seems like different researchers do their own experiments and their own sort of surveys, and then once the researchers leave, like you sort of everything sort of is left behind, and there is no way to sort of track people in the long run. So like how, like, have you thought about like in the long run, how should we sort of build an ecosystem where we can track outcomes over time?
So Nikhil, this is not just a thoughtful question for the sake of saying it. It's an incredibly important question that you have asked. I have always wondered the same. It's also about a lot about coordination. It's also about dealing with bureaucracy, especially with IRB, right? Because then you're dealing with kind of human subject, and you're talking like, let's say I have collected data, and then I want to share with, say, Nikhil. I don't know Nikhil. So there are lots of these kind of not just kind of bureaucracy, but a lot of these trust issue that needs to be resolved. But I do think, and I do hope that institutions like JPAL, which funds a lot of these RCPs, they should try to kind of have an inbuilt system where, let's say, I did some data collection, but down the line, Nikhil is interested in this. There should be some direct way where he can start the project with my identifiers. Of course, conditional on all approvals from the relevant universities and the co-authors. Also becomes the issue about like, oh, you're going to work on the data, so who's the like, are we part of the like? I can totally see the logistical challenges here, but I think these are solvable challenges. I can definitely tell you that these are solvable challenges. But again, we are in a profession where every single thing, people look at it carefully. There are lots of rewards, not rewards associated with things, so the incentives might not be the same. I am all up for anything like this. I've been pushing the donors that I have been working with on these long terms. You have to kind of develop, because this will not happen in an administrative setup, right? This is not going to happen. So I think, and I think there are some. So YRISE, which is Yale, they try to do some of the long-term studies. So because they are interested in kind of scale up, spillover, but I would not say that have found many researchers. I think there are many researchers who want to do this, but I think the kind of this match between researcher and donor, well, okay, let's try to do this kind of long, because you want to write the paper quickly. You want to wait for 5 years, 7 years? Probably not. So there are some weird incentives here, but I think it's solvable if more people kind of collaborate. And I would say JPAL would be kind of a perfect place to start, given that they actually fund these projects, right? So they could, because they are directly interacting with donors, so they could actually try to convince the donor that this is actually a useful exercise. But yes, it would be wonderful if we can do that. Thank you, Nikhil.
Thank you.
Anything else, Nikhil?
No, I guess another question related to the project was like, did you also find spillovers, or like, have you thought about spillovers to like, say, boys who didn't get cycle? Like, did they buy cycles? Or like, if you have, when you're thinking about an ideal experiment, like if you give cycles to a few girls in a school, like, do you like imitation and that kind of stuff?
So I'm glad that you asked that. That's exactly so. The two experiments. So Bihar is not an experiment. Zambia is an experiment where we could have potentially collected data at a household level, but as Subodhji was mentioning, Zambia is a very expensive place. So we actually did surveys in school. But in this ideal experiment that I'm very excited about, the excitement hasn't gone down. So this is something, I get a lot of these younger people, they ask me like, oh, I'm burnt out, I'm like, if you're picking up the right set of questions, like, I don't think people, for example, I started research around 2005, and I haven't felt that I have burnt out. So I'm still very excited with the same question. So here, this either experiment, we are going to do the randomization at a household level. And there's a reason why I want to do that. A, it would be incredibly expensive to do this at a school level. B, if I do it at household level, I can do a lot of these outcomes at the household level, which I had always wanted to do. For example, income generation. It's very likely that other member is using the bike, and going to work on weekends or selling something. What is happening to the siblings? All these questions are kind of unanswered. So that is the plan.
Okay, thank you, Nikhil. Samarth, it's your turn.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Professor, for this. Wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed hearing the background of the study. So I have a two-part question for you. One would be, you mentioned in the early stages of your presentation that you were kind of unsure about the effectiveness of cash transfers. So I'd like to hear from you. There are studies that kind of concludes, one, if I can remember, in Bihar about, comparing the benefits of cash transfers for mosquito net vis-a-vis, providing them with the mosquito net, and the results were not statistically different. So I would love to hear from you. Do such studies usually prefer in-kind transfers, or do you keep cash transfer as well as in-kind transfers in same line? And secondly, maybe you can go ahead and answer this first.
No, go ahead. With your second.
And secondly, the study, the results of the study clearly indicates the positive impacts of such interventions on girls' attendance as well as, punctuality, as you mentioned. The other side of the coin being the quality of education. The paper did mention about quality education, and so I would in your experiment, did you apart from the access to education, were there any inference to the quality education, and had that any impact on increasing livelihood or employment in Zambia?
So these both are extremely important, thought-provoking question. So the first one is there are studies that have kind of compared cash versus kind of in-kind or unconditional conditionality. So there are studies that have done that. I think one of the issue with research or policy along these lines is very context specific. Maybe this worked in Bihar in time period T. Will this work in Bihar in time period T+1? We don't know that. We can speculate, and I don't want to get into controversy because I have some information, discussions with very senior officials in terms of how this policy evolved, how people figure out different loopholes. So, but I don't have any evidence. So clearly, I think the best response to your answer is like you have to do something in that context, see what you find, figure out what are these kind of the dynamic pieces, because a lot of the learning happens back and forth. So you have to predict how your households are going to respond in time to period 1 and period 2, and then kind of incorporate that in time 3, and then kind of design something in a clever way. Can you draw broader conclusion from literature?
Yeah.
I would still be slightly careful, because context really matters a lot. I probably, like, for example, there are some very standard ways to improve school enrollment. I don't think their context matters, because like people have figured it out, just because there has been so many experiments over time. Right? But I would say the conditionality, unconditionality, I think context do matter. So I would not feel very confident taking, say, one result from here and say, no, this is, I don't have confidence. So that's kind of your, the first one. And the second question, what was it?
Yeah, I mean, the quality of education. I mean, we
the
addressed
quality
the
of
excellence.
education. Yeah, so I think in Zambia we did not anticipate any test score. One reason was, this is like my prior, because moving test score is very hard. Like there's nothing we are doing to like that's going to improve the test score. But what do we know? We know that these kids saved time, right? So they saved 35 minutes of time one way. What are they going to do with that 30 minutes? We do not know. Then we know that the attendance went up, which means the instruction time did go up and the punctuality went up. But the literature on test score is like, it's pretty mixed in terms of instruction time. There are some papers that talk about that if instruction time goes up, it improves test score. And to the surprise, we actually do find. We find actually that the math test score went up. And the numbers are not very small. It's almost like in line with what people have found in the conditional cash transfer literature. It's kind of 0.1 standard deviation. So did find on test score, and that's a surprise to us. We had not anticipated that. We also collected some kind of softer measures, which is about attention, right? Attention focus. The idea is like, oh, I'm not walking 2 hours, I'm riding bike to school, so then am I more attentive because I'm less tired? That's kind of the underlying idea. So we didn't find any effects because, doing this test in this setting was really hard, because these tests developed to measure attention and focus. It's kind of a bit hard to implement. But yes, the effects are there on test scores.
Thank you, Professor. That's really insightful. Thanks a lot.
Okay, great. Upanita, you are next, please.
Thank you, Professor, for such an insightful presentation. I really enjoyed it. This is something which is very close to my heart, because like even back in Bengal, like under certain schemes called the Shobut Chathi scheme, like there are bicycles which are given to students like who are teenagers and are going to government schools on the basis of the income. I have a few questions, like based on like the research that you did and the outcomes, there have been a great amount of positive impact that introduction of these bicycles have kind of made on Zambia or probably Bihar and other places. Like, could you give me like some insight on how the other governments who are probably lacking behind in like promoting education among girls or students, or especially like from those who are in the rural parts all across the world, how have they been responding after such positive outcomes that your study has probably shown in Zambia and other places? That is one of the questions. The second question is, I back in my undergrad days in Calcutta, I was the founding member of my social service club, and over there we used to work with a lot of slums and policymakers. And in one of those slums, there was like a school which was run by a particular individual who literally had nothing, and there was no support apparently from the government or from the like from the policymakers. But on the other hand, there was this policy gap where probably the officers were like, we have tried to implement a lot of these outcomes, like these educational policies to improve education outcomes, or probably like increase the gross enrollment ratio, or probably motivate students from who are like kids, not teenagers, like primary school students, to study and like to come and study, or motivate their parents to come and send them to school. But in this case, there has always been a policy gap, and these things were probably not implemented. So, what would you suggest? Like, we have been doing our bit, like we have been sending students to volunteer as teachers, or probably like kind of generating income for their mothers by doing small things, by motivating them to make things and selling them, and then other things as well. But what do you feel, probably based on your experience from all these places, what should we be doing? Yeah, that's it.
So thank you so much for difficult questions. So the first one is slightly easier to answer. When you do an academic work, I can only talk on my behalf. So these are questions I'm interested in. Right? Does it matter to anyone else? It matters to me. I care about it. So when the Bihar study came out, I think it did generate a lot of attention from the media, just because it was kind of like a nice policy, kind of looked good, and also worked, right? Which led us to Zambia work. So when we started doing Zambia work, I do know at some point I had exchanged one email with somebody at the bank when they were trying to kind of do something similar in Mozambique and Mali. Was it based on our study or no? I don't know that. I cannot say that in a concrete way. But then when we finished our Zambia study, World Bicycle Relief, and we were involved in kind of a research proposal like the USA, like scaling it up. And clearly we have shown evidence. And World Bicycle Relief, as I said, is an amazing organization, very passionate about this issue. So they received money from USAID to do this work at the community level in 5 to 6 countries in Sub-Saharan Africa. So I think that's kind of the good news. The second question is more kind of about like addressing many challenges around education, right? I think there has been, I would say, very concrete learning in terms of how to send kids to school. I think people have figured it out. Like, you have to understand what the barriers are. So if the barriers are opportunity cost, figure out a way to kind of compensate, and it should likely work. I feel more confident in saying that. Then there's this big study, important study by Rob Jensen about these informational campaigns, right, in Dominican Republic. Apparently, when they are scaling it up, they don't find similar large effects. I think the study is either still going on. I don't think it has been written yet. But the idea was telling kids and parents about returns to education kind of moves things at the margin. So I think there are ways to kind of move those outcomes, like how to send kids to school. I would say the bigger challenge is around learning outcomes. You go to school, what do you really learn? How do you address that? And I think that's where I think we need more work. So we know that, like, let's say, you have kids who are in grade 5, they don't know stuff in grade 2. What do you do? Like, and then Karthik and his co-authors have this paper about this Mind Spark paper where they say how learning at the right level makes a big difference. And I think there are a lot of these behavioral nudges. So I tried something in Zanzibar about goal setting, because there's a whole literature on goal setting. And I don't find any effects on test score because the barriers are something else. It's like, sure, I can set goals, but what if I don't know how to address some of these other complementary inputs into this education production function? So I think to your second point, we have, I would say, there are evidence in terms of improving test scores, but I would say that still that's a works in progress. Because even when you scale up things, you might not find. So it's like, think about policies like, oh, let's make attendance mandatory, like, let's train the teachers. So for example, there's a lot of push. If you have read the new education policy, I would encourage you to do that. It kind of pushes schools to kind of go out, think outside the box. How do you make kids more curious? How do you make more kids more creative? And I can tell you that I'm myself involved in two interventions where we are collaborating with organizations that kind of specifically trains teachers to kind of change their pedagogy. How do you kind of make kids more curious? So it's like you're training the teachers because they're the one who are interacting with the students. Now, will changing curiosity improve test score? I don't know that, right? Because we don't. We hope that it would. Second, we are also doing another intervention where we are collaborating with a small NGO called Caravan, based in Champawat, and what they do is have developed these pedagogy, different kind of pedagogy with different kind of learning, social, emotional, things like that. So I would say here where we are stuck in the literature. So for example, when you look at the returns to education literature, you will say that if you study one extra year, it increases your return by, let's say, 6 to 8% or something like 8 to 10%, right? That's in terms of earnings. So that's estimated. I don't think we know yet that if you increase curiosity, critical thinking, how will it impact learning outcomes? Because we haven't kind of tracked these kids in the long run. So we hope that you'll get an answer to some of these things. But I would say that maybe for the right reason, we need to focus on the pedagogy that, sending kids to school and they're like, I don't learn anything. So why should I go to school? So maybe it is about different pedagogy. And I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done here.
Okay, thank you, Upanita.
Thank you,
Apurva, your turn, please.
Yes. Hello, Professor. I personally had no idea about this project. So while I was reading the paper and the other articles, I was really intrigued. And I have two questions, short questions actually. So my first question was when it came to the payment and the non-payment in the treatment group, did you observe any specific differences when it comes to Zambia or Bihar in terms of social groups? Because in India, it's like pretty heterogeneous with respect to like religion and other divisions. So was there any such survey or any question in while collecting the data? And with respect to Zambia, I particularly have no clue with respect to the societal structure over there. And my next question was about the income generation. So I don't know if I missed it, but you said something about income generation. So is it like analyzing an income generation matrix or something like that you have in your mind? So that was one question.
Thank you, Apurva, for again reading the paper carefully and asking two very important questions. So, like in the context of Zambia, the results that we actually don't find much difference between payment and no payment. We actually don't. In fact, payment in most cases are a bit more stronger, but we cannot statistically differentiate the difference between the payment and the no payment, which is actually a good news for people who are designing the policy. It tells you that, imagine design a policy and I'm like trying to impose some monitoring exercise. Oh, I'm going to collect this $5. I want to do this 75% attendance or something like that. So maybe in this one context where we work, again, I'm not going to extrapolate that. We are saying is like, whether you charge any money or you don't, you're totally okay, right? I mean, of course, from a policy standpoint, it's good to not charge money because it reduces the administrative cost. And it's not as if $5 is going to make a big difference to your state budget, right? But it tells you that administratively, it's kind of a lot simpler. So, that's for example, and Bihar did not have payment versus payment. They actually gave cash to girls to buy bikes, right? So it's kind of a bit different. Yeah. So your second question about income generation activities. So we did not collect, or we did not have an opportunity because this time is limited when you're collecting data. But what we did find that many of these girls were involved in income generation activities. So, for example, you can think about like, oh, they're doing some work, which is, they are enrolled in school, but are also doing some work. We actually found reduction in income generation activities. So they were less likely to be involved in income generation, which is exactly what we anticipate, that if you're going to school, that's kind of mechanical in nature. So that's the, we don't have kind of detailed data in terms of how much income was generated, blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Vinayak, please.
Hi, thank you so much for your excellent presentation. Also, like going through your profile and seeing the papers which you have written, it's like I guess we have to like send multiple mails to like understand like some of the aspects of it. It's like it's very fascinating to see your work. Also regarding this this paper, the one thing which I found fascinating was like there is conditional transfer of money here rather than giving the goods directly. For instance, in Kerala, I've noticed and like roosters being supplied to these farmers, like not regular households, with like rather than transferring the money to buy the roosters. And like I've seen single roosters running across because the bunch which came along with it just died because of the poor quality of the roosters which are provided. So I always find it fascinating to see how libertarian the redistribution aspect is. So the I mean, the more the choice goes to the consumer, I guess they have a higher higher chance of choosing the best thing for them. Like, but your paper like really gives like many examples of like why it doesn't work. And the India paper, the paper which you wrote earlier on India, it gives like an idea of like why the transfer, like the societal constraints and the social norms which India does those. Like my question would be like a different one, which would be kind of slightly from an Austrian perspective. I would say like isn't there a cheaper way of achieving the same level of empowerment for the girls? Like can't we let the market find the more cheaper way of achieving the same level of empowerment? So I mean, but at the same time, I mean, whenever coming into transfers, I've seen direct impact when going through the tribal colonies in Kerala. I've seen how Manrega scheme is helping the tribal women empowered, and like how they are the bargaining capacity within their household is changing. Given that, but always like, for instance, just to take the particular case of schooling itself, like wouldn't there be a better solution than going to a school like your other paper address the issue of caste too? So like in a caste ridden state like maybe Bihar, like maybe going to the school isn't the best choice for the student. Maybe studying from home, like using a different device would be a much better choice for them. So isn't there always a possibility of a better choice than this? And then like isn't this attributing to the idea of aesthetic flow, and like Abhijit Banerjee, they point out the libertarian paternalism and those sorts of ideas. Like why can't we let the like a market find a better solution always? Like yeah, because like we have seen news of like how caste is playing in schools in Bihar and places like that. So like caste-based violence and stuff like that. I'm just putting one example there. There are multiple means to say that the regular traditional schooling, which we see as a solution, might not be the best solution in this scenario. That's just my thank you.
Okay.
So thank you, Vinayakan. Very difficult question, very loaded with many things. So I'll try to answer this, but maybe I will not do a great job at giving a very thorough answer. I think like what you have to keep in mind that anytime you launch a policy, you think about, at times it's like, oh, you want to do this politically, right? You don't need any research for that, right? For example, when the Bihar government launched the policy, there is no evaluation, right? They did it because somebody believed that this is good. And also, as I said, my prior was this would not work, was totally wrong, because this is something that was one of the highest priority of the chief minister, right? So everybody wanted this to work, so it worked, which tells you a lot about that you have to understand the political economy of it. When leaders want something to work, can, my own priors have completely been taken, like they would work. I'll give you a slightly different example, which I'm digressing, but I'll give an example. So I have this work on COVID vaccine in Bihar and kind of Sierra Leone. So when we went in, thinking about supply side barriers, kind of where the vaccines should be placed, what kind of incentive should. Bihar had almost 54% vaccination first dose, way higher than most countries. And this is a team with lots of researchers. And in one of the discussion with the additional chief secretary health, he's like, the research that you're doing is for your own curiosity. We have figured it out, right? So my own take is when policymakers have their mindset in terms of doing this, they end up doing it. I would say, like, the follow-up question to that is, how do you replicate that in a different setting? And I have had this discussion that, oh, you guys did so amazing in terms of COVID vaccine, data, everything. How can I replicate this in education setting? And they said that it will not happen. Well, nahi hoga. So that's something that is important to understand. But you broadly question about like other choices. I mean, you're making an assumption that is going to work here, right? Which is a question in itself, that will market actually work here? We don't know that answer. And what are these alternate ways of achieving same outcome? That also don't know. We know that that you have private sector education, right? You have kind of a low quality private school, and a lot of kids get enrolled in public school, they get all the benefits, but they are going to private school just because teachers come every day, right? So that's kind of the one evidence we have. We don't have like homeschooling. We don't know that. I mean, US mein homeschooling hota hai, but homeschooling is not something that's common. So you have to kind of identify those various alternatives and kind of figure out that which one is actually going to work. And actually, I don't have an answer. I don't know which one is going to work because we have not seen that. I'm happy to talk kind of more one-to-one because this is a
all right. I think
broader discussion.
Anybody else has any comments or questions? Not, I'll take 2 minutes to say a couple of things and then we can talk about those if need be. First, I think I'm really glad that we did this. It's really helping the young people understand what professors do and how they go through the various phases of being an academic, rejections, acceptance, revisions, and so on. I think that itself is helpful. Second, Nishithji, my prayer was that it will work. So I also had a prayer when it was announced. And actually, I was surprised beyond my prayer because the scale was so large that the bicycle factory in Ludhiana actually opened up a production facility.
Yeah.
So they also betted that at least the bicycles will be bought. Okay, whether the bicycles will lead to birth control later on, there was a separate issue, but that the bicycles will be purchased and that won't be the usual procurement hassles of the government with kickbacks and delays and all, because the girls will buy the bicycles on the promise that they will get the money from the government and the government will have no choice but to deliver it. So they were also betting that at least the bicycles will be made and sold. Okay, so there was no issue in their mind. They said, okay, this is too big to ship them from Ludhiana. It makes no sense whatsoever because bicycles are heavy. They are not designed to be shipped to poor Bihar. Let's just set it up there. So I think that was also a bet. Okay. On the issue that Nikhil raised about the long run effects, I would say, don't worry about it. It's too hard to figure it out and almost impossible to understand all the factors that will come about in the long run, and to keep isolating those changes like, roads are being built, something else will happen, And you cannot just keep on externalizing your data set and purifying it to keep. So I won't worry too much about it. Okay. So if you can achieve medium-term results in terms of outcome, I'd be happy. Okay. So I won't care about the very long run, okay? Because you never know how things will be. And keeping track of that data, and keeping track of the confounding changes that are taking place along with that is almost impossible to get funded and almost impossible to make sense, I think. So I would, on Vinayakan's point, I would say we need to differentiate between academic research and policy research. Academic research has its own logic and has its own place. And you need that, even if I'm not doing it, but you need the academic research because that's what keeps you straight and honest. Policy research is loosey-goosey and it's not keeping you so neatly, but you need the policy research too. And I'd like to actually add to his question that, and I hope, Professor Nishith, you will also think about it. When I started by saying this is an example of a targeted effective subsidy, I would also like to hear from a policy perspective, what are my options of targeted effective subsidies to reach the goal? And the goal is what Nikhil called as the long run. So if you have a long run goal in mind, what are the today's effective targeted subsidies to reach those? Where does it stand? Even if it's not very long run, even if it's medium run, would it be better to give midday meals to college through these girls, okay, free midday meals, or is it better to give them a bicycle because they have to walk long distances? That I know. By the way, I'll tell you my own, there's a village school in Rajasthan that my family supports. And, once I went there and I found that in the 8th grade, there were more girls than boys. And I said, what's going on? This is rural Rajasthan. They said, well, the boys have bicycles and they go away to the better schools further away. The girls just walk here. That's why once I had seen that, I said, okay, thank you, Miss Bihar, it's going to work, okay? Because the girls just can't get to good schools and they can't get to schools. So it's obvious that now, they miss the family in times of crisis, may sell the bicycle. It's an asset, okay? And, there's money, it's saleable asset, and in case there is a shortage of money, they may sell it. So that was the only drawback that I could see. That's why that girl would hide the key because somebody else might take it and not give it back. But it's a saleable asset. Keep in mind that when you give transferable, saleable assets, the family will sell them when the time comes as is needed. But otherwise, I'd like to ask, where does it fit into the various options to help girls, to empower girls? Where does this scheme fit into the whole spectrum of subsidies that could be designed to promote, or whatever you want to call it, empowerment or whatever else you want to call it, of girls in Bihar? Where does it fit? Is it the best scheme? It works, yes, we know. But is it the best scheme? That's what Vinayakan was asking. And I would also like to add that too, because one of my points in my overall writing of the India development goals is that we don't have enough study of subsidies. And that's because, for various reasons, let's not go into why, but there isn't enough, in the economics literature, subsidies just a tax with a minus sign in front of it. So why do we need a theory of subsidies? Because whatever we just write T, it's not said that T has a positive value. T can have a negative value too. So what's the deal to have a theory of subsidies? But in India, we do need a theory of subsidies because the subsidies are going to be with us and the practice of subsidies. So I'm glad that we have a very rigorous study which analyzes subsidies as such, rather than thinking of them as T with a minus sign in front of it. And I'm glad that at least my prior was found to be true in Bihar, and whether other places can also learn from it. So that's just my thought. And again, I thank all of you. If there's any other points, Professor, if you have some points, we can perhaps hear from you, overall reaction to you.
No, I mean, thank you for inviting and making this introduction. I think I'll broadly, agree with most of the things that you said. At times you need rigorous evidence, at times you don't. I think it's okay at times to go by gut feeling, because something that he maybe alluded to, politicians have a time frame, 5 years, right? And not actually 5 years. It's almost like 3 years, because when you get into the 4th year, you get into the re-election zone. So you cannot just have always rigorous evidence to help you do things. And that's where the repository helps, right? You have done something, somebody can I would like encourage people to write a blog so that it's easily available for people to look at. So that's where it can be useful. But at times, if you're thinking that, oh, I have this policy, let's go and test it out. Like by the time you'll have a new person in power, right? So I think like you have to understand that how that timing plays very important role, and especially like it's providing different choices. Like this is what we have found. We say things with more confidence. So, for example, one complaint that comes from a lot of politicians and policymakers, and this is not just me randomly making it up, but this is one-to-one conversation. Is like, I would love to know things more concrete. That can you say with kind of a lot of confidence that why don't you do this? This is going to work. And I think many times research cannot do that. We can say things, but there are lots of assumptions to work. And when those assumptions are true, it does work, right? But it's not obvious that you do in T+1, it's going to work. And I think that's a disconnect. In fact, I'll be hosting a big workshop at Northeastern next year in March. We call that the missing link between kind of evidence-based research and actual policy, right? Because there's a gap. I create an evidence, but that evidence is true for certain assumptions, and you have to kind of make a lot of extrapolation. So I think a lot of work needs to be done how to try to translate these things into action. And that's why if you have more and more results, the same thing, I think that gives you more confidence that this is going to work, or this is not going to work. So I'll stop here, given that we have far exceeded.
I think we have run out of time. And Samarth, thank you. It's very late for you, I know.
Yes, I realize that.
Yeah,
thank you so much, and happy Durga Puja to
you.
both of you.
Let's end it here, Prof. Maybe we have you back in a year. You have something new to tell us, and then we'd like to hear from you what else you have found. But in the meantime, thank you to all the followers and the discussants. It's been great to have this happen. Let's end it here. Bye to everybody.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.